You're listening to the January 2015 episode of the RiskStudio podcast. In this section, we will cover some key risk management topics which have been in the news lately and hence should be considered within the external context analysis stage of your risk management process. Here are some of the topics related to risk management which have been in the headlines recently. As these news topics are covered extensively in the media, we're not going to drill down into these topics individually here. However, we will highlight some of the lessons from these news stories which may be relevant for risk management purposes. As you can see from these news stories, that there are many significant risks which are emerging from outside the organization. Hence, analysis and understanding the external context is very critical. This has been highlighted as a very important step within the ISO 31000 standard. If your organization only focuses on internal context and does not pay attention to the external context, your organization may soon find itself unprepared when the next crisis hits its business. Another thing which stands out is that there are many external events which are absolutely outside control of a single organization. Preparing a robust crisis management plan is one way to ensure that your organization will be able to respond and recover from significant crises. So ensure that you have a robust crisis management plan in place and you are evaluating and testing it periodically. You may need to execute it soon in a real crisis. If your organization is still not investing in risk treatment for cybercrime and cyber attack related risks, your systems may be vulnerable to such risks. Cost of risk treatment for such risk at a single organization level are significant, and hence your organization should consider collaborating with other organizations within your industry to develop industry-level risk treatments. Now let's look at some of the other risk management related news items which should be considered within your external context analysis. Articles in this section are taken from Risk Spotlight portal, which is a web-based subscription service providing daily updates of news articles organized by individual operational risks. Our first story is from Information Age, where they published an article about how a 7-year-old girl hacked a public Wi-Fi network in 10 minutes. This was done in UK as part of an ethical hacking experiment to generate public awareness about Wi-Fi safety, or in this case, the lack of it. So from a risk management perspective, ensure that you have adequate security in place when your employees use company laptops or mobile devices in public Wi-Fi places, and any guidelines for such usage is also covered within your information security policies and communicated to employees. Our next story is from Business Insider, which covers results of a study highlighting that cybercrimes in India are growing at a rate of 107% annually, with nearly 12,000 cases every month, and this is expected to cross 300,000 in 2015. The increase in use of mobile devices for online banking and financial transactions has been highlighted as one of the reasons for the increase in the cybercrime numbers. So from a risk management perspective, organizations in India need to ensure that benefits of providing easy banking and payment facilities are weighted against the risks of providing such facilities. As such cybercrimes are new in India and rising, organizations should also consider working together to create awareness within the public on practices to stay safe online. Our next story is from the Globe and Mail, which covers a story about a hacker who stole information from a bank in Switzerland and then demanded ransom of 10,000 euros for not publicly releasing the stolen information. When the bank refused to pay this, the hacker publicly released details of 30,000 emails between clients and staff. According to the bank, The published information did not contain any confidential client information, and they had already informed the clients about the stolen information. From risk management perspective, consider within your risk treatment options how your organization would handle such a scenario, where the hacker steals some sensitive information and demands a ransom to not publish the information publicly. The information in this case was not very sensitive, and the ransom demanded was also low. But you should consider in your scenarios factors such as high level of sensitive information and higher ransom amount. Our next story is from Reuters about Argentina suspending HSBC Argentina's money transfer abroad for 30 days due to failure to fix the irregularities in credit transfers. 2 months ago, the bank was also charged for helping clients evade taxes by siphoning their funds off to Switzerland. From risk management perspective, within your risk analysis, consider scenarios where the regulator may suddenly suspend critical part of your business. You should also consider the level of relationships with the regulator and the recent regulatory actions during your risk analysis. Our next story is from OECD, which recently released its foreign bribery report, which analyzes the crime of bribery of foreign public officials. While the report highlights many important statistics, the one which stands out is that 53% of the bribery cases involve management level employees or CEOs. So much for setting the tone at the top. Also, intermediaries were involved in 3 out of 4 cases. On average, bribes equaled 10.9% of the total transaction value. Most of the bribery cases were identified during internal audit or merger and acquisition due diligence procedures. So, from a risk management perspective, if you are involved with managing corruption related risks, then please do consider reviewing this report to highlight the sources of such risks and identify what type of risk treatment are most effective. Our next story is from The Hindu, which covers results from surveys by Deloitte India, which highlights that corporate frauds are set to rise in India over the next 2 years. The key reason behind this is reliance on inadequate or dated mechanisms to manage fraud risks. So, from a risk management perspective, if the findings from the Deloitte survey reflect ground reality, then risk managers in India should consider whether their fraud management risk treatments are adequate for mitigating fraud related risks. Collaborating with other organizations may also allow organizations to share their practices and identify how these can be improved over time. Our next story is from Bank Info Security, which highlights concerns about US card issuers and merchants being able to switch to chip and PIN cards by October 2015 deadline. Missing the deadline won't result in fines, but will result in shift of liability for fraud. If a card issuer or merchant does not support chip and PIN cards by October 2015 deadline, then they will assume liability for fraud that results from compromised magnetic strip card transactions. So, from a risk management perspective, organizations are performing cost benefit analysis on risk treatment of moving to chip and PIN cards. Organizations who do not suffer from large amount of fraud are reluctant to invest in technology to move to chip and PIN cards. What risk managers should also consider is how fraudsters will adapt to the change to chip and PIN cards and ensure that they are also prepared for the new techniques fraudsters will adopt for committing credit card fraud. Let's cover a couple of news items about standards and frameworks. Our next story is about public consultation conducted by OECD of its principles of corporate governance. This completed on 4th January 2015. As part of this initiative, OECD is considering revising its principles of corporate governance, which were last revised in 2004. The revised version is to be published in 2015. So, from a risk management perspective, if you are involved with governance aspects of risk management, then you may want to review the draft of the revised principles and start assessing how this may influence your current risk management governance practices. Our last update for today is from COSO, who recently released a new research report offering guidance on using the internal control and the ERM framework to assess cyber risks. So if your organization is already using the COSO frameworks, then you can consider using the recommendations in this report for also managing your cyber risks. Even if you do not use COSO, you may want to consider the recommendations presented in this report. That completes our roundup of news stories for this podcast.